Great. I'm Sabreena Ali. I'm a pre-sales engineer from Logic Monitor, based in London. So today I just want to start with who Logic Monitor is, what we do, and then we'll go through some of the AWS stuff. So Logic Monitor itself is a fully hosted IT core infrastructure monitoring platform. So essentially what we do is we monitor the public cloud, and that includes multi-cloud platforms, so AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, but also we monitor your on-premise infrastructure, so that hybrid environment. If you've got projects where you're migrating from on-prem to the cloud, we will bring in all of that data so that you don't lose visibility of migrating your infrastructure devices. Now, the way we pull in data from the public cloud is via the CloudWatch API. So we're pulling all of your CloudWatch metrics into Logic Monitor portal. You've got one URL where you can have a visibility of all of that infrastructure, all of those resource metrics. But also, there's another way that we bring in the data. So in addition to complement that CloudWatch metrics, what we do is we require an install of what we call a collector. So a collector is essentially a 280 meg download. So you'll be installing this on, say, one of your EC2 instances within either a Windows or a Linux virtual machine. And then once that's installed, you'll be able to use all of our data sources. So these data sources are essentially templates that we use to sort of define what metrics we pull through. So when we look at cloud monitoring in terms of AWS, we kind of look at three different pillars. The first is resource monitoring, right? So we want to bring in the health and performance of all of your resources and services within AWS. The second is the service provider itself. So AWS, if Amazon itself goes down, we want to be able to make sure that we can monitor and alert on that. And thirdly, your billing metrics. Now, essentially, this doesn't have to relate to health and performance, but it can be really relevant, especially for internal stakeholders. You want to see your spend within AWS as well as the health and performance. Once we pull all of that data through, everything is done within the Logic Monitor cloud. So in our data centers, we've got various data centers, and that heavy lifting, number processing, number crunching, all of that's done within the Logic Monitor cloud. So you don't have to be resource heavy within your AWS environment. With that data, what we do is out-of-the-box alerting. So these thresholds are built on AWS itself, so vendor recommendation. You don't have to streamline or configure what you want to set as your thresholds because we've got those severity levels built into the Logic Monitor platform. So we know, what metric a CPU spike should hit at warning, when it should reach critical, et cetera, et cetera. Using that data, we also build correlations. So this can be quite relevant, especially when you want to have a visual representation of what's connected to what within your environment, what's dependent on what resource, and so on. But also, we've got out-of-the-box dashboards. So these are auto-generated. As soon as you bring in your AWS metrics or resources into the platform, we will auto-generate those dashboards. So your Lambda functions, your S3 information, all of your EC2 instances, which resources are being used the most, which we'll go through as well very quickly. And forecasting option as well. This can be really relevant. And every single metric that we pull through into Logic Monitor, we can forecast on. So that's really useful when you want to schedule reports, look at those alerting thresholds, and sort of assess and plan for the future as well. And we also have reports that you can schedule out of the box to be sent to various team members daily, weekly, monthly, etc. Now, Logic Monitor itself is built on a REST API, which is why we're able to integrate with any open API tool. So out of the box, we integrate with ServiceNow, Autotask, ConnectWise for your event management tools, if you want those alerts to automatically be routed through to create a ticket within your ticketing system, or even your Slack or Microsoft Teams, your chat tools, your orchestration tools, Terraform, Puppet. It doesn't matter what tool you're using, we'll be able to integrate with it and send those alerts through just to sort of streamline those workflows. So looking at how we pull the data through, as I mentioned before, it's via the CloudWatch API. Essentially, all you need is an IAM, so you'll need a role within your AWS console. You'll need the Logic Monitor ID. What we're using is cross-account authentication, so just one account, 2 keys that you'll need to enter, create that role within AWS. All we need is reader permissions, so we don't request any read-write permissions. We're not going to make any changes. It's read-only permissions that we'll require. Once we enter those credentials through, essentially you can then define what you want to bring in. So whether you want to bring in those resources hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, depending on your environment. And then whether you want to terminate, your AWS resources immediately or whichever frequency you want to choose. We also have the ability to choose various regions from where you're bringing in those metrics from. It's just basically making various API calls to those regions, to those resources. You can also get more granular in defining what resources you bring in. So if you're not using auto-scaling, if you're not using Elasticsearch, then you can pick and choose which resources you will want to bring in. You also have the ability to use tag filters, so this can be quite useful if you've got resources tagged within AWS. You can bring in all your production resources and don't need to bring in your dev, et cetera, et cetera. One thing that I mentioned before, we also use a collector to get in additional metrics, so just to complement those, the resource monitoring. So CloudWatch doesn't give you, for example, memory and disk space or application level metrics on your EC2 instances. So for that, you might want to monitor specific EC2 instances with the collector. It doesn't take much resources, requires about 4 gig of RAM of memory. And you can get as granular and choose certain collectors that you want to, certain EC2 instances that you want to monitor via collector, specific ones via CloudWatch. It's completely up to you. Once you bring in all of those resource metrics through, that's it. It's a one-time setup, and you've got all of your EC2 monitoring, whether it's via the collector or CloudWatch. All of that will be in one view, so you don't have to go to different tools to look at what you're monitoring. And if we just have a look at some of the resources we have here. So we've got a Linux VM EC2 instance here. Essentially, we're monitoring this via collector. How? Because we've got Apache running on it. This isn't monitored by CloudWatch because we wouldn't be able to see that information. But now we can see that there's Apache running on it. You've got your CPU, memory, disk space, all of these information that's brought through automatically. It's a bit of an issue with the Wi-Fi here. Essentially, then you can forecast on each of these metrics. So whatever you're bringing in, it's just a one-time setup, and then it's automatically monitored from there on. So if we look at some of the service limits, so essentially we have data sources, which is how we bring these metrics through via the collector. So we've got about 1,800 templates that we will use to then monitor, because we know that you'll want to monitor your overall service health, right? If AWS go down, we use their RSS feeds to then bring in to Logic Monitor whether they're going through maintenance updates or any sort of upgrades or outages, etc. But we can monitor this overall state of AWS as well. So if their service has gone down, we will be able to alert on that, whereas even you probably wouldn't be aware if you were monitoring from the respective AWS CloudWatch. Using those metrics, what we do is we have out-of-the-box dashboards. As I mentioned before, the overall health and performance, you can look at all of your services, what's up, what's down, whether there's any services that are going to hit the alert threshold that Amazon have defined as, warning, critical, error, etc. which ones are healthy. This can be displayed in a NOC environment just to show you a simple view of what's up and what's down. But you could also get more granular and look at more metrics of maybe not just the overall view, but you might want to look at specific services, so your various EC2 dashboards as well. So, sorry about the slow connection. Essentially, each of your services, whether they're RDS, the Elasticsearch, your ECS clusters, your EC2 instances, we can bring in those dashboards. You can also customize those dashboards to look at specific metrics. However, most of them are already out of the box, so you don't have to fiddle around with them. But these can be very useful, especially when you're looking at your top 10 or top 20 or top 50 EC2 instances by CPU, memory, disk space, etc. The other part of monitoring is the billing overview. Now, whether this doesn't have to do with the health and performance, however, this can be really important because you want to make sure that you're aware of how much you're spending within AWS, right? So we've got our templates that we use. So you'll give us billing permissions, read-only permissions to look into, to pull that data into Logic Monitor via an S3 bucket. And then we're automatically calculating, you know, where you're spending most, cost by tag, cost by, you know, total cost in dollars, sterling, whatever currency you're used to, cost by operation. And then you can have different ways of visualizing that data. So whether it's a pie chart or a bar graph or even a table widget, you have different ways of looking at it. So you've got 82% on EC2 instances. You might have a dashboard of, you know, underutilized and over-provisioned VMs, just so that you know where you're not requiring certain EC2 instances, and then you can sort of manage those spending options. But again, as I mentioned, every single metric that you bring through has a forecast option, which can be really useful if you're trying to make those plans ahead to see, you know, how that data might look within the next month, next 3 months, etc., etc. Now, given we've got 15 minutes, that was more or less a very high-level overview of the AWS side of things within the Logic Monitor platform. If you have any questions, please come to the Logic Monitor booth in the Black Studio. We'll be there all day, so I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards as well. Thank you.